Hi, thank you for joining me today on my Christmas 2020 page. I'm really happy with how this turned out, in particular the background and the wreath. So I started in my large Dilutions journal, and I'm using like three colors: a mid purple and a kind of bright cobalt blue and a deep green, which is like sort of like a forest green. It's just a cheap acrylic. This is kind of dollar store acrylics. I do not like to get too hung up on exact brands, etc. when I'm doing pages, so that you don't have to run out and buy exactly what I have. Just pick and choose what you have. So I'm just using a palette knife to side swipe the color across the page, and as I'm doing this, when I got to the top corner of one of the pages, I realized that I hadn't protected my underneath pages, so I quickly ran and grabbed some craft mats. So just a word of warning, make sure you have craft mats between your pages first, or some kind of protector between your pages so that you don't get this acrylic paint onto your next page or your previous pages. So then I just repeat this process with all three colors. This is the end of the purple, and you can see that I do try to get it like into the center of the page. And then this is this blue. It kind of looks more bright here in this video, but it's actually definitely kind of more of a cobalt blue. And again, I'm just trying to fill up some more of the spaces using the same side motion with my palette knife. And now I'm using this dark forest green, which is really Christmassy looking. So when you see this, it doesn't look very attractive, that's for sure. And those of you who know me know that I never get too hung up on the beginnings of my page, because the background layer, while it's really important, it's still the background. And I just want, when I finish this page, I just want some of these greens, blues and purples to still be peeking through and add texture. So now I'm just using plain white gesso, and I'm going over and I'm using the knife really quite flat against the page, and I'm just adding in some white gesso over the entire page. And you can see that I'm kind of doing this layer by layer, so I'm getting like a thin layer on first, and then I am adding in like a little second layer. So I'm just taking this very super fine glitter and I'm spraying it on while it's wet. It's a super fine, very sheer glitter. It's not an iridescent glitter, and it's just to kind of give it a snowy effect. And I'm really happy with how that looks. Very hard to see what's happening here. And this is just the paintbrush that I made. So you'll see the page kind of going backwards. So this is just a piece of Hessian burlap, and I've just made it kind of stringy at the top. I've just threaded it, and then I just used some tape to roll it onto the end of a paintbrush, and that's what I created this first layer of the wreath with. This is when my laptop crashed, and so I completely lost this one part of the video. So I had already used this dark forest green. Now I'm going in with this kind of olivey yellowy green, and I'm just using this homemade brush again. And you can see it's really feathery, really worked very well. I was so happy with how this came out. You know, if you made a smaller version of this, you could definitely do a card this way with a wreath. It's so easy, not having to cut maybe tons and tons of die cuts. I just used a pencil to create the circle, and then I just used a medium green. It's kind of like an appley green, this one. And again, I'm just using this cheap paint, going around creating another layer onto the wreath. So I've gone dark into light colors. Now I'm going to add some dark into my light colors and create a middle, like a middle shade, middle color. And then I'm finally going to do one more very fine layer, just a little bit of thready layering on the top of the very dark forest green again. And so now I have quite a lot of dimension and color and texture to this wreath, and I'm really happy with it, how that came out. So now I'm just going to create 3 pieces of paper. This is Rustic Wilderness and Evergreen Bough and Forest Moss. They're Distress Oxide Sprays by Tim Holtz, and I need 3 sheets of paper to die cut later on. So just spray the colors down. Make sure you've shaken them up really, really well. You don't want anything sitting on the bottom. You don't want the pigment sitting on the bottom of the container, because it will clog your spray. That's the beautiful new one. The 3 colors are Rustic Wilderness, Forest Moss, and Evergreen Boughs. So that evergreen looks kind of really quite blue, and the Forest Moss looks quite kind of brown, and of course the Rustic Wilderness is very green. It's very Christmas green. So I'm just creating a piece of paper, just picking up the colors randomly, and I'm not really fussing about this because I'm going to be die cutting it, and honestly just doing it like this is way good enough. And I'm using this die by Dee's Die, and it's actually mistletoe, but I'm using the leaves of it, and you'll see why a little bit later. But I need leaves and berries on my wreath, so I'm using them to die cut these leaves. And here they are die cut and ready to roll. Sometimes you just have to be a bit careful when taking out very delicate little things with stems, right? So, and now I am going to use this Tim Holtz die. It is a colorized die, and it's that really cute little Santa bag, but I'm just using the tiny little X's that are used as stitches in the original die. See? And I'm going to cut them twice out of brown, dark brown paper, and I'm just using these as the nibs of the little crab apples that I'm putting on the wreaths, and you'll kind of see what I'm talking about in a second. So I cut 2 lots of them out. That's more than enough. I'm going to be cutting about 12 or 14 crab apples, and then I'll kind of play around with arranging them later. So for the crab apples, see there, I'm saying there's 2. For the crab apples, I'm just cutting these tiny little ovals, and I've used a nice heavy watercolor cardstock, or watercolor paper I should say, and I've just got this nesting oval dies, and I'm using the second smallest size to cut these little ovals to make the apples. You can see it's not the tiny one, but the second one. So they're kind of about 3/4 of an inch, or even a little less than that. And then this is Distress Oxide pads. That color is the amber, fossilized amber. And I'm just going to touch color onto some of them, some in fossilized amber, and then ripe persimmon. Really beautiful color, just absolutely gorgeous color. I don't even know how to describe it. And I'm doing some with the yellow and some on ones that don't have any yellow. So basically I'm just coloring these little crab apples. I have crab apples in my garden, so I guess I'm kind of familiar with the colors. Campfire, beautiful color. I didn't know I needed it until I got it. Absolutely gorgeous, kind of orange, very, very intense orange. And my final color is Candied Apple, I should say. I keep wanting to say crab apple, Candied Apple. And you'll notice when you use Candied Apple, it's not really a very intense red like pillbox red. It's very dark. I mean, it's not dark. It's hard to explain. It's kind of intense, but it's because it's an oxide, and it doesn't really have that absolutely hit you in the face red. So it works really, really well for Christmas. I just love it. I just absolutely love it. So here I am using these little stitches into the crab apples. I folded some of them in half to make the little nibs on the crab apple. And now I'm just using black VersaFine Clair, and I go around the edge of each crab apple, just take the whiteness away and make it like have a little black rim around. And I do that with all of the crab apples. So here I am just arranging them on the wreath. I always like to play around with where I want to put things before I glue them down. Find the arrangement I want, glue them all down, and then I take the little mistletoe leaves and I just use them where the crab apples are, almost as if the crab apples are coming out of the leaves. It's hard to explain, I guess, sometimes. A little bit of white. This is just white acrylic paint, white gesso paint, just adding some highlights. And I like to do this after I've glued my crab apples down because I want the light to be coming through from one direction. And if I paint this before I put the crab apples down, then it would be like the lights coming from anywhere and everywhere according to how I arrange the crab apples. And then I just do a little bit of white on the leaves as well. Later on I will pop this white up a little bit more. And now I am cutting out, or stamping and then cutting out my feature for the right hand side of the page. So this is Picket Fence. It's a stamp that I got quite recently from someone, and I love it because it has a really big Santa face on it, and I've actually used this quite a few times for cards already. And so I am going to use him as my little feature on my right hand page. This is a cling stamp, but you can see he's quite a nice size. I mean, this is a large Dilutions book, so it's pretty big. So Tim Holtz Tonic Studios, I don't think they're available anymore. This says rubber, so I know I have to flip this round to take a cling stamp. See, it says cling. Oh, it says clear, which is for cling stamps. I'm going to take my piece of white cardstock, just a heavyweight cardstock. Watercolor paper works really perfectly for this if it's really smooth. I don't like stamping on watercolor paper particularly because it's usually quite textured. So I'm making sure it's right into the corner, and I'm going to use a piece of sticky grid by Sizzix. And this sticky grid is going to hold my paper down nice and perfectly still while I stamp. Make sure that I know exactly where I'm going to be putting it back, so it's right into the corner absolutely perfectly. VersaFine Clair again. I'm just going to stamp this. I'm not going to be too fussy about how I stamp this because this is a technique that Tim Holtz shared quite recently, and I love this technique. It's where you stamp, you then paint with acrylic paints, and then you stamp on top again and get all your black detail right back. I actually like sometimes doing this and not stamping on top, but in this instance I'm going to show you the full technique. I clean my VersaFine Clair off immediately with water. And one thing I must say is that with VersaFine Clair, it must be completely dry before you watercolor on top of it, or you use anything water-based on top of it, because it is water reactive until it's dry. Once it's dry, it's perfect. I'm going to be using a watercolor brush, one of those water brushes that has water in it, but I've removed all the water because I don't want to water down my colors, and I like to just put a little bit of each color. And when I talk about a little bit, for a painting like this, really tiny little bit. I'm just going to use like a flesh colored. In this case, I've used Tattered Rose, which is one of the Distress paints by Tim Holtz, because it's a beautiful flesh color. And then I'm just using a salmon, a little bit of red. I'm using the same kind of cobalt blue that I used in the beginning. I used a black, a white, and I did also use Speckled Egg, which is a distressed paint. Just putting a little bit out of each. So I'm just going to let this play in normal time so that you can kind of see how to do this painting, the little bit of painting thing. I also used, this is a Ladybug Red. It's called Ladybug Red. So nice bright red. I also used a burgundy for some shading in the hat. Ladybug. It's a really pretty color. Again, you know, these are just inexpensive acrylics. I've had them forever and ever and ever. And I find if you seal your paints up really properly, they do last a long time. I've been painting with golden acrylics, the really expensive ones. They are, what are they called? Open acrylics. They not cheap, but as long as you seal them properly and you keep them clean, they really do well. And it's the same with these acrylics. Just keep the nibs clean, keep the lids clean, seal them up properly, and like I'm pretty sure that burgundy I've had for 5 years. I used to use it for painting on costumes and stuff too when I had a dance studio. So just look after your tools and they will last a long time. So there are the colors. So I'm just showing you that distress paint, and then that sort of salmon-y color, this beautiful cobalt blue color, and that's, as I say, that's the same color I used at the beginning. And the blue, if you're wondering what I'm using the blue for, there's that red, there's that burgundy. The blue I use just for shadowing. And then there is that gorgeous, gorgeous speckled egg, one of my all-time favorite colors. So I need some of that, and then some of the white. And in this instance, I'm using the distress white rather than gesso, simply because gesso is very heavy-bodied and these are much lighter bodied. And then just some black. So just starting with this pink. I'm just like letting this play out a little bit, not too crazy fast. So I'll create a background of pink on his face and his lips, and then I've used the salmon to just blend while it's wet, just blend a little salmon into his cheeks, his nose and his lips. Then I've mixed in some blue to create a grey into that kind of pinky color, the tattered rose. And some shadowing in his eyes as well, and then I use the bright blue inside of his eyes, and then I'm using this speckled egg in his beard and onto the fur of his hat and the pom-pom of his hat. So I'm just kind of layering everything. I'm adding some sort of more shadowy greys into the beard, and then I've used the red and a little bit of the burgundy. So I've used the red where the stamp was kind of highlighted, and I've used the burgundy where it was darker. Having a little fun here. I do enjoy painting. So doing as little or as much as you want. I used some of the white over where his glasses are, where the glass of the glasses are, but I did not actually paint the glasses, and that is because I'm using a gold pen later on to make his glasses gold. So, I mean, you definitely could leave it like that, but for me, I, of course, wanted to show you the stamp over the paint kind of a effect. Make sure before you stamp that you have dried this, and then popping it back into the stamping platform. I haven't moved the stamp, obviously. That's my head checking that it is exactly in the right spot. And now VersaFine Clear Black. Doing my stamp. This time I want the stamp detail to be perfect. So when I open up here, I see I've missed a couple of spots. So I'm just going to go in and stamp. That's me almost breaking my glass mat. If it's not absolutely perfect, you can add more ink if you need to. In this instance, it just had a little ink still on the stamp, so I just wanted to pop up his eyes a little bit. So there it is, and all the detail right back onto that center. It's gorgeous. I mean, it really is gorgeous. I do love this technique. Thank you, Tim Holtz, for sharing recently. Came out really great. There's some other little stamps that you can use. These are by Stampers Anonymous. The little wise men in the corner, or that Santa in the corner, in the other corner. These would be great to use. You don't have to use the stamp that I used. See, like that vintage Santa. So use what you use. Don't feel like you have to rush out and try and buy something. So here I'm just fussy cutting. I love fussy cutting, but especially when I'm stressed, I find that it's really, really helps me. I know people who hate fussy cutting, but this is an easy fussy cut. So if you happen to have the stamp or you go and buy the stamp, it's really fun. It's 2 minutes, you're done. So there's not a lot of detail, right? Fussy cut. And now I'm just going to do the gold pen around his glasses, Signo pen. I like to just warm my pen up on my hand before I use it, because it's hard to sometimes get these things to write if you haven't used them for a while. So just warming it up. And then I'm just going to detail his glasses with this Signo marker, this pen. So now I'm just going to add some of my dry clear glue just to the fur and the bobble on the end of his hat. And I'm just going to glitter that. I'm just using a kind of glass and silver mixed glitter, and anywhere that I didn't quite hit it with enough, I just add a little bit more. I haven't covered every millimeter of this, I've kind of done it streaky. And so now I'm going to add some dimension on the background with some stenciling. And I'm going to stencil with a stenciling paste. In this instance, I'm going to use this Antarctic stencil. It is obviously South Pole, but I want to use that gorgeous compass. Of course, I don't want to use all the stuff that's around the compass, so now I'm going to use a low-tack tape to tape out all the areas that I don't want. And this is just something I buy at the hardware store because it's cheaper to do this than to use washi tape, and washi tape's just way too pretty to be doing this with. So I've taped out everything I don't want. I'm going to place it down in the corner. And I always like to tape my stencils down because I have moved stencils before and not been impressed with myself. So I'm going to just use the tape to and I've taped it at the top. And I'm using this Liquitex heavy body gel, but you can use whatever texture paste that you like. I happen to have this one. I've had it for a long time, and I seal it really tight so it seems to just not dry out, which is great. And I'm going to use the same blue that I used in the background, kind of a cobalty blue, and just add that. That's just that same cheap acrylic paint. I'm going to add it to my paste to create a colored paste. I do like doing this sometimes, you know. It works really, really well, and it's easier than trying to color after you've stenciled something with plain old white. So I'm just using a palette knife, pushing it through the stencil, and not making it too crazy thick, but not completely thin either, because I do want to have a little texture. Voila, there you have it. And I'm just using an opalescent or iridescent fine glitter, just to pull that color back a little bit, and also add a little punch, add some texture, add some dimension. And I looked at this one here, it was way too heavy. That's a kind of a glass glitter, but as I say, you guys do what you really like to do. I decided to go with a fine glitter, and it worked really, really well. It pulls the color back a little bit. It's not quite so in your face. It blends in with the background. And now I'm using this Tim Holtz stencil. It has the word Christmas on it. It has a bunch of Christmas words on it. Again, this is not a new stencil, so I'm very much about using what you have. It's all very well to always be using new stuff, but if you, like me, you don't have access to new stuff as easily as we once upon a time did, then just use what you have. And also, you know, there's no point in buying these things and then using them when they're new releases and never using them again. I just cannot see the point of that. I just think you should be doing, making the most of your craft supplies, especially these kind of things. You know, they're not inexpensive, and they're not crazy expensive, but they're not inexpensive either. So now I'm just adding a little bit of green. I almost added it to the whole bunch there, and that would have been a bit of a disaster because I don't need that much. A little bit of that same dark forest green, and I'm stenciling the word Christmas in green. And once I put the glitter on, you'll see like tonally it's the same, but it's been softened by the glitter. So it works really, really well with the colors in the background and with the colour that is in the wreath. There's the glitter going on. Tap it off. And I will repeat this process with some of that Ladybug Red into the modelling paste, and I'm now going to do the number 25. And with this red, you can definitely see how it definitely needed a little pullback. It's quite bright, although I will be adding red into the background later on. I want this to be, some red details, I should say, but I want this to be a little bit more in the background. So there it is, and it picks up the color in those crab apples beautifully. I've now used a die to cut out the words joy and love and peace. Peace I'm going to put in the middle because it's the longest word, but I've only used the center part of this die. So the rest of this die I will save and use in another project. So I'm just using an acrylic block to line up my tiny little letters, and the acrylic block is gridded, so if you kind of have a struggle with eyeballing spacing, it's a good idea to use a little acrylic block like this, and it can help you to space, like if you spaced each letter in the center of the acrylic block that's underneath it. In my case, I am not doing that. I'm just literally eyeballing. I fast forwarded so that you don't have to sit through me slowly gluing. That again, this is the Dries Clear. It's in a needle nose bottle. A bottle with a needle nose tip is what I should really say. And I'm using these tiny little quilling tweezers. They are what they call tension tweezers. And I'm using them to hold these tiny, tiny little letters and get everything in the right spot. And there goes my last letter being glued in. Perfect. The other great thing with this Dries Clear is that it adheres very, very well and pretty quickly too, right? So, and those letters are the exact same paper, as I said, that I created earlier on for the leaves, and I created actually 3 little pieces of that paper because I did the leaves and then I did these little letters, and all the excess pieces that I will keep and do another project with will be great. And I also did these Christmas trees out of the exact same green, so it's just 3 shades of green. Once more, that was Rustic Wilderness, Forest Moss, and Evergreen Bough that I used to create that green paper. So this is just a die. Again, I've had it for a long, long time. It's a die with matching stamps, and then the stamps are like a check, a dot, and a chevron. So just something kind of funky, a little fun. And I'm using this VersaFine Clair Black to go around the edges of all of the trees. So once I've done all of the trees with this little black outline, just makes it pop against the background, I do the same with the center, but I'm really concentrating on just doing the very edge of the center. I just want them to have a nice little black outline. And now I'm taking this Stickles, and it's just like a really dark forest green. Make sure that it is running, and I'm going to pop the letters out a little bit. The Stickles will add some sparkle. They will add a little dimension, but because of this dark forest green, they also pop this color a little bit more against the page. So sometimes when you look at something, you kind of go, it needs a little something extra. That's what I did here, and voila, it came out really great. So I'm going to 3D my center. So I'm just going to use some foam tape at the back of his head so that he's popped off of the page a little bit. And because it's in my journal, it's not like on a card, I'm pretty much covering the whole of the back of his head to make sure that he is supported when my book is closed. By the time I finish any of my journals, honestly, they've quadrupled at least in size. Find where I want to put him and pop him down. and he looks great just there. And then I have to glue all these background trees, and I also decided I was going to let one of them kind of pop slightly off the page, and then I'll use the leftover piece to kind of come in from another corner, almost so it looks like it's a part of a background paper. So again, just using my VersaFine Clear, no, sorry for that. I'm using my Dry's Clear. Glue all my little bits and pieces down. Pages coming together quite nicely, and I'm going to use this dark green stickles around some of the trees, around the edge of them, again just to create a little dimension, a little pop, and just like a finishing touch really, although my page is not quite finished. And so I'm going to use like a golden yellow and this kind of blue. This blue is called Twinkle. I do know that because I use it all the time. So it's really just like an iridescent that has a blue sparkle to it rather than say a pink or a greenish sparkle to it. And I'm going to repeat on a couple of the trees with this color here. You can see I have part of a tree going off the page there. Don't I wish I could work this fast? I've fast forwarded obviously. So I do it with the blue, and then I do the same kind of thing with the leftover trees with this kind of gold, just so they all have a little sparkly edge. They look really cute. So at this point in time, I thought my page was done, but I kind of looked at it later on and went, I think I need a little bit more something red. So I had to think really hard about what I wanted to put in. But I was really happy with this background, these little bits of color showing through, the texture. It really looks kind of snowy, like blizzardy, with still little bits of color showing through, and it's still very textured. I made sure that the middle was really well covered, and I was super happy with it. But it's still it was the next morning. Woke up and went, okay, I need something else, and I decided to go for these little red cardinals. So this is a set by D's Distinctly, but I'm telling you, you can get cardinal dies, just probably in every make. So these two have a little separate wing, and then the two facing each other at the top are just one dimensional. So what I did was I cut out in just plain old red, and I used the VersaFine Clear Black to create a little darkness, and I went a little bit darker on their heads and their tails, and then the rest of them just kind of more black on the edges. So I'll just do the edge, and then a little bit heavier on the head, and then again just a little bit more into the tail, like that. So and I did that with all of the cardinals. So I'm just showing you that those two have a little wing, and then those two don't. So now I'm just going to glue them down, except for the wings. I'm going to glue them into as if they're sort of sitting on the wreath. And because the Santa has red on his hat, that's why I felt that the red was missing from other parts of the page. It felt like it wasn't really fully balanced. So I did these cute little cardinals, and I'm really happy that I did. It just finished off the page for me. I was like, do I need to darken the edge of the page? No, I didn't. This is exactly what I needed. So I'm just using some little 3D dots for the wings, and I add a dot onto each wing and have them 3D'd off the page. And what I like to do with this is I like to have the wing attached to the bird, so just the curve of the wing where it would be coming off of the bird. Later on you'll see I will go in and glue that down. So this is kind of not the final step on these wings. I will come back to them. Glued my little lovebirds up at the top back on as well. And then just with a black fine liner, I just did a branch that they would be sitting on, and created like a branchy shape. And this is the nice thing about freeform drawing, is that, you know, you're not restricted to it going across the letters or numbers or whatever. You can draw wherever you want it to be. So I just did my little rough sketch, and then with a brown marker, in this case this is an alcohol ink marker, an alcohol marker. This is who is this by? Prisma. So I'm just like going in and creating a thicker branch now with this, now that I know where I want the branch to go. And you could have used a pencil. I'm not afraid to just put a pen straight on the page, but if you're worried about where you're going to put your branch, just use a pencil, because you can erase if you go wrong. And then I'm just taking a grey marker, and I'm just going to make some darker areas on the underneath of the branch. So it's like light and shade. Again, you don't really have to do this, but I'm just very detail orientated. Those who do my classes know me well. And now I'm just taking some white paint, and I'm creating just some highlights onto the birds here. And I also touch up all the little highlights that I did before. There was a couple of them that I just wanted the highlight a little bit brighter in the center of the highlight, so I just used this paint, went in and did a little bit of a touch up, and just add some light and to the little wee birds, to their tails. I've added highlights to obviously the crab apples and to the leaves and the birds. That's about it. Nothing else really needed anything. All the little apples, very kind of 3D looking. I really am happy with how the wreath turned out. I mean, if you don't have a lot of leaves, or you don't have time to die cut lots of leaves to create a wreath, this is definitely a really super easy way of doing it. You can see I'm just adding some highlights on the leaves, make them pop out a little bit, and adding just the few leaves around where the apples are has created a real 3D effect. But at the same time, it's not like this really full lots of die cutting kind of a wreath. It's just got a little bit of extra dimension, and I was very happy with how that came out. So then that's when I remembered I had to still glue down the leaves. So I'm just taking my glue, just put it right on the very tip of the leaf, of the wing I should say, and I'm pushing the wing down, so now the wing looks like it's actually attached to the bird rather than detached. I do this with both of these little birds, and with that my page was done. You can see here the apples, the leaves, and the texture of that wreath, the little sparkly words, a little bit of sparkle all over the page, because what is Christmas without glitter and sparkle? I still love that you've got little bits of colour showing through in the background, and the stenciled areas, very sparkly and dimensional and really pretty. So I hope that you enjoyed this page. If you have any questions, as I say, feel free to contact me. I'm happy to email you with any replies. And I know it's been a difficult year, but we will all get through this, and crafting has definitely made it a lot easier. Here's the final page. Thank you very much for joining me, and I hope that you will join me again.